The community center smelled of old wood and lemon polish, a scent that reminded Sarah of her grandmother's house. She pushed through the heavy double doors, her messenger bag weighing down her shoulder. The hallway was quiet, almost too quiet for a Thursday evening. Most people were at home having dinner. But Sarah had specifically chosen this time. She wanted to be alone. At 32 years old, Sarah Chen had never touched a piano with any real intention. Sure, she had pressed a few keys at a friend's house once or twice during her childhood, making random sounds that made everyone laugh. But actually sitting down to learn? That was something she had always pushed to the back of her mind, filed away under someday, along with learning to swim properly, and finally reading those classic novels everyone talked about. The recreation room was at the end of the hallway, and through its small window, she could see the old, upright piano sitting against the far wall. It looked lonely, she thought. The room was used mostly for yoga classes and book club meetings. The piano was just there, a piece of furniture that occasionally got used by the music teacher, who came on Saturday mornings for children's lessons. Sarah had signed up for those lessons 3 weeks ago, but she hadn't told anyone, not her husband Marcus, not her best friend Jenny, not even her mother, who called every Sunday like clockwork. It felt too personal, too vulnerable. What if she was terrible? What if her fingers couldn't do what her mind wanted them to do? At her age, learning something completely new felt like exposing a secret weakness. She opened the door and stepped inside. The room was empty, just as she had hoped. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in a harsh, white glow. She walked slowly toward the piano, her sneakers squeaking slightly on the linoleum floor. The bench was worn smooth from years of use, the wood a deep honey color that had darkened with age. Sarah sat down carefully, as if the piano might startle and run away. She placed her bag on the floor beside her and flexed her fingers. They were ordinary fingers, she thought. She worked as a data analyst, spending her days typing reports and creating spreadsheets. These were fingers meant for keyboards and coffee cups, not for making music. The piano keys were yellowed with age, especially the white ones. Someone had placed a beginner's book on the music stand, probably left behind by a student. Sarah opened it and looked at the notes, the little dots on lines that were supposed to mean something. Her teacher, Mrs. Kowalski, had explained the basics during their first lesson last week. Middle C, the treble clef, the bass clef, whole notes and half notes. It had all seemed so logical in theory. But now, sitting here alone, it felt overwhelming. She took a deep breath and placed her right hand on the keys, finding middle C the way Mrs. Kowalski had shown her. Her thumb rested on the white key, and she pressed down gently. The note rang out, clear and pure, filling the empty room. It was such a simple sound, but there was something about it that made her chest tighten. Sarah pressed the next key, D, then E. The sounds floated up and hung in the air. She played them again, a little more confidently this time. C, D, E. Then, back down, E, D, C. It was just a scale, just 3 notes. But she felt a small flutter of excitement. For the next 20 minutes, she worked through the exercises from the book. Her fingers stumbled and pressed wrong keys. She had to stop and look down constantly, losing her place on the page. Her left hand felt completely useless, like it belonged to someone else. But she kept going. Then something strange happened. Sarah was attempting a simple melody. Mary Had a Little Lamb, which the book promised was easy for beginners. She had played the first line several times, each attempt a little less terrible than the last. Her fingers were starting to remember the pattern. E, D, C, D, E, E. She didn't have to think quite so hard about where each key was. On her 7th try, something shifted. Her fingers moved almost on their own, and the notes came out smooth and even. The melody was recognizable. It actually sounded like music. Sarah felt a warm sensation spread through her chest, down her arms, into her hands. It was pleasant, almost like drinking hot tea on a cold day. She finished the line and sat very still. Her hands were tingling slightly. She looked down at them, flexing her fingers. They looked the same, as always, but that feeling, that warmth, it was still there. Sarah shook her head. She was probably just excited about getting the melody right. That made sense. Learning something new released endorphins, or dopamine, or whatever the brain chemicals were called. She had read about that somewhere. She decided to try the melody again. This time, she closed her eyes, just to see if she could do it from memory. Her fingers found the keys. E, D, C, D, E, E. The notes rang out, and that warmth returned, stronger this time. It spread up her arms and into her shoulders. She felt it in her spine, a gentle vibration that seemed to resonate with the sound of the piano. Sarah's eyes flew open. This wasn't normal. This was something else entirely. She stood up quickly, the bench scraping against the floor. Her heart was pounding. She looked at the piano as if it might explain what had just happened, but it sat there silently, just an old instrument in a community center room. Maybe she was tired. She had worked a long day, and she hadn't eaten much lunch. Low blood sugar could cause weird sensations, couldn't it? That had to be it. Sarah grabbed her bag and headed for the door. She needed air. She needed to think. But as she reached for the handle, she stopped. Something made her turn around and look at the piano one more time. It looked different somehow. Or maybe she was different. She couldn't quite put her finger on it. But something had changed in this room. Something had awakened. She left quickly, her footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. Behind her, in the recreation room, the piano sat in silence. But if anyone had been there to notice, they might have seen that the air around it seemed to shimmer slightly, like heat rising from summer pavement. Sarah drove home with the windows down, letting the cool evening air clear her head. She told herself it was nothing, just her imagination, just the excitement of learning something new. But deep down, in a place she wasn't ready to acknowledge yet, she knew the truth. Something had happened when she played those keys. Something real, something powerful, and it was only the beginning. Sarah couldn't sleep that night. She lay in bed next to Marcus, who was snoring softly, completely unaware that his wife's entire world had tilted on its axis. The ceiling fan turned lazy circles above them, and she watched the shadows it cast, trying to make sense of what had happened at the community center. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt it again. That warmth, that strange vibration that had moved through her body when she played the piano. It wasn't frightening. Exactly. It was more like discovering she had a sixth sense she never knew existed. Like suddenly being able to see a new color that had always been there but invisible until now. She had almost told Marcus over dinner. They had eaten the leftover pasta she had made on Sunday, sitting at their small kitchen table, while he talked about his day at the construction site. He was a foreman now, managing a crew of 8 guys building a new apartment complex across town. He loved his work, loved being outside, loved the satisfaction of seeing something real take shape from nothing. Sarah had listened and nodded and asked the right questions, but the whole time, her secret sat in her throat like a stone. I think something weird happened to me today. That's all she had to say. Marcus would listen. He was good that way. But what would she tell him? That she felt something strange while playing "Mary Had a Little Lamb" on an old piano. It sounded ridiculous even in her own head. When Friday morning came, Sarah was exhausted. She went through her routine on autopilot. Shower, coffee, toast with peanut butter, drive to work. The office was in a glass building downtown, all modern and cold. She sat in her cubicle and stared at her computer screen, trying to focus on the sales data she was supposed to analyze. But her fingers kept twitching, wanting to move in patterns. C, D, E, E, D, C. You okay? Jenny appeared at the edge of her cubicle, holding 2 cups of coffee. She was wearing a bright yellow blouse that somehow looked professional on her. Jenny could pull off anything. Yeah, just tired, Sarah said, accepting the coffee gratefully. Late night? Jenny perched on the edge of Sarah's desk, the way she always did when she wanted to chat. Couldn't sleep. Everything okay with Marcus? Everything's fine. Just one of those nights. You know? Jenny studied her for a moment, her dark eyes seeing too much. They had been friends since college, and Jenny had a way of knowing when Sarah was holding something back. But she didn't push. That was another thing Sarah loved about her. Well, if you want to talk, I'm here, Jenny said, squeezing Sarah's shoulder before heading back to her own cubicle. The day dragged on forever. Sarah went to a meeting about the quarterly reports. She ate lunch at her desk. A sad sandwich from the vending machine. She replied to emails and updated spreadsheets and did all the things she was supposed to do. But her mind was somewhere else, entirely. By the time 5 o'clock came around, she had made a decision. She was going back to the community center. She needed to know if what she had felt was real, or just her imagination playing tricks. Sarah told Marcus she was going to the gym. It was a small lie, but it felt necessary. She still wasn't ready to share this. Whatever this was, she changed into comfortable clothes and drove to the community center, her hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary. The parking lot was more crowded this time. There was a Zumba class happening in the main hall. She could hear the music thumping from outside. But the hallway that led to the recreation room was quiet. Sarah's heart was racing as she walked toward the familiar door. The room was empty again. The piano waited for her like an old friend. Or maybe like a puzzle she needed to solve. Sarah sat down on the bench and took a deep breath. Her hands were shaking slightly as she placed them on the keys. She started with the same simple melody from yesterday. Mary had a little lamb. The notes came easier this time, her fingers finding their way with less hesitation. And just like before, that warmth began to build. It started in her chest and spread outward, a gentle heat that felt alive somehow. But this time, Sarah didn't pull away. She kept playing, moving through the melody and into the next line. The warmth grew stronger, and with it came something else. A sense of connection, like invisible threads were linking her to the piano, to the sound, to something vast and ancient that existed just beyond her normal perception. The air around her began to shimmer. At first, Sarah thought it was just her eyes adjusting to the fluorescent lights. But no, this was real. The air itself seemed to ripple and glow faintly, like she was sitting inside a soap bubble that was catching the light. She finished the song and sat very still, her hands still resting on the keys. The shimmering continued for a few seconds, and then gradually faded. The room returned to normal. But Sarah felt completely changed. This was real. Whatever this was, it was absolutely real. She tried a different song from the beginner's book, Ode to Joy. It was more complex, with more notes, and a melody that moved up and down the scale. Her fingers stumbled at first, but she persisted, and as she played, something extraordinary happened. The notes began to resonate differently. They sounded richer, fuller, like the old piano had suddenly become a concert grand. Each key she pressed seemed to release not just sound but something else, something she could almost see. Tiny sparkles of light danced in the air above the keys, appearing and disappearing in rhythm with the music. Sarah gasped but forced herself to keep playing. The sparkles grew brighter, more numerous. They swirled around her hands like fireflies, beautiful and impossible. She reached the end of the song and the lights slowly faded, winking out one by one until the room was ordinary again. Her hands were trembling now. She clasped them together in her lap, trying to steady herself. This wasn't just a strange sensation. This was something supernatural, magical. Those weren't words she had ever thought she would apply to her own life. Magic was for movies and books, not for data analysts from suburban neighborhoods. But there was no other explanation. When she played the piano, something happened. Something beyond the natural world. Sarah stood up and paced around the room. Her mind was racing through possibilities, trying to apply logic to something that defied it. Was she having some kind of breakdown? Had she been exposed to something toxic? Was this a medical condition? But it didn't feel wrong. That was the thing. It felt right. Like finding a piece of herself she hadn't known was missing. Like coming home to a place she had never been before. She sat back down at the piano and placed her hands on the keys again. This time, she didn't play from the book. She just pressed random keys, slowly at first, then faster. Her fingers moved without conscious thought, creating a melody that came from somewhere deep inside her. It wasn't beautiful. Not really. It was clumsy and uncertain, but as she played, the warmth built again, and the air began to shimmer. This time, though, something different happened. The window across the room suddenly rattled in its frame. The sound made Sarah stop playing immediately. The shimmer vanished, and everything went still. She stared at the window. Had she done that? Had the music, or whatever power was flowing through her, actually affected a physical object? Sarah's phone buzzed in her pocket, making her jump. It was Marcus, texting to ask when she would be home. She looked at the time and was shocked to see that an hour had passed. It had felt like only minutes. She gathered her things quickly and left the recreation room, her mind spinning with questions. As she walked down the hallway, she made herself a promise. She would figure this out. She would understand what was happening to her. And maybe, just maybe, she would learn to control it. Because whatever this power was, it was growing. She could feel it inside her, like a seed that had been planted and was now beginning to sprout. And something told her that what she had experienced so far was only the beginning. The real question was, what would happen when it fully bloomed? The weekend passed in a blur of normalcy that felt almost painful. Sarah went grocery shopping with Marcus on Saturday morning, pushing the cart through the familiar aisles of the supermarket while he debated between two brands of barbecue sauce. They had lunch with his parents on Sunday, sitting around the dining table while his mother served pot roast and asked when they were planning to give her grandchildren. Through it all, Sarah smiled and nodded and played the role of herself. But inside, she was somewhere else entirely. Her fingers tapped against her coffee cup in rhythms. She found herself humming under her breath. Melodies she didn't consciously remember learning. And at night, she dreamed of pianos that glowed with an inner light, of music that could reshape the world. Marcus noticed something was different. On Sunday night, as they were getting ready for bed, he asked her if everything was all right at work. Sarah assured him it was fine, just some stress about an upcoming deadline. The lie came easily, which bothered her more than she wanted to admit. They had been married for 6 years and had always been honest with each other. But how could she explain something she didn't understand herself? Monday arrived, and with it came Sarah's scheduled lesson with Mrs. Kowalski. She had been looking forward to it all week. But now, she felt nervous in a completely new way. What if the strange things happened during the lesson? What if Mrs. Kowalski saw the shimmer in the air, the sparks of light? The community center was busy on Monday evenings. There was a seniors craft group in one room, a youth basketball practice in the gym, and the sounds of activity echoed through the building. Sarah found Mrs. Kowalski in the recreation room, already seated at the piano, her gray hair pulled back in its usual neat bun. Sarah, punctual as always, Mrs. Kowalski said with a warm smile. She was in her late 60s. A retired music teacher who gave private lessons for extra income. She had a kind face and patient hands that moved over the keys with practiced grace. "How was your practice this week?" Sarah sat down on the bench beside her teacher. "It was interesting." "Did you work on the pieces I assigned?" "Yes, and I tried a few other things too." Mrs. Kowalski nodded approvingly. "Exploration is good. Now, Let's see what you remember. Start with your scales. Sarah placed her hands on the keys and began the C major scale. Her fingers moved smoothly up and down, and she concentrated hard on keeping everything normal. No warmth, no shimmer, just regular piano playing. She could feel the power inside her, like a flame she was trying to keep from growing, but she managed to contain it. Very good, Mrs. Kowalski said. Your finger position has improved. You've been practicing properly. They worked through the exercises from the book, and Sarah focused on the technical aspects. Hand position, posture, reading the notes on the page. Mrs. Kowalski was an excellent teacher, patient and encouraging, pointing out mistakes gently and celebrating small victories. But halfway through the lesson, Mrs. Kowalski introduced a new piece. It was a simple, classical melody, something by Bach, written for beginners. This one requires feeling, she explained. Don't just play the notes. Try to express the emotion in the music. Let yourself feel it. Sarah's stomach clenched. Let herself feel it. That was exactly what she had been trying not to do. Go ahead, Mrs. Kowalski encouraged. Don't be afraid. Music is about emotion as much as technique. Sarah took a breath and began to play. At first, she kept her emotional walls up, playing mechanically. But the melody was beautiful, and despite her resistance, she found herself drawn into it. The notes flowed together, telling a story without words. And as Sarah let herself feel the music, the warmth began to build. She tried to stop it, to push it back down. But it was like trying to hold back a tide. The power surged through her, and her playing suddenly transformed. The old piano resonated with a richness it hadn't possessed moments before. The melody soared and dipped, filled with nuance and depth that Sarah's beginner skills shouldn't have been able to produce. Mrs. Kowalski leaned forward slightly, her eyes widening. Sarah, she whispered, that's beautiful. Sarah could feel the air beginning to shimmer, could sense the sparkles of light starting to form. She was losing control. In a panic, she deliberately hit a wrong note, then another, breaking the spell. The warmth receded quickly, and the piano returned to its normal sound. Sorry, Sarah mumbled. I lost my place, but Mrs. Kowalski was staring at her with an odd expression. How long did you say you've been playing? Just a few weeks. Since I started lessons with you. And you've never had any training before? No, never. Mrs. Kowalski was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was thoughtful. Sarah, I've been teaching piano for 40 years. What you just did, that moment before you stumbled, that wasn't the playing of a beginner. The emotion, the phrasing, it was quite advanced. Sarah felt heat rising to her cheeks. I was just trying to do what you said. To feel the music. Yes, but... Mrs. Kowalski trailed off, studying her student with curious eyes. Well, perhaps you have a natural gift. Some people do. The music just speaks to them, in a way it doesn't, to others. A natural gift. If only it were that simple. They continued the lesson, but Mrs. Kowalski seemed distracted, watching Sarah more closely than before. When the hour was up, she gave Sarah her homework assignments, but then added, I'd like to increase your lessons to twice a week, if you're interested. I think you could progress quite rapidly. Sarah agreed, mostly because refusing would seem strange. As she left the community center, her mind was racing. She had almost lost control completely. What if the sparkles had appeared? What if the window had rattled again, or worse? She needed to understand this power. Needed to learn how to manage it properly. The next morning, Sarah did something she had never done before. She called in sick to work. She wasn't physically ill, but she needed time to think, to research, to figure out what was happening to her. Marcus had already left for the construction site, so she had the house to herself. She spent hours on the internet, searching for anything that might explain her situation. She typed in phrases like, piano supernatural powers, and music causing strange effects, and unexplained phenomena while playing instruments. Most of what she found was fiction, fantasy stories, and role-playing games. But then, she stumbled across something interesting. It was a forum thread from several years ago, discussing historical accounts of musicians who were believed to have unusual abilities. There were stories about composers who claimed to hear music from another realm, tales of pianists whose performances could move entire audiences to tears without explanation, legends of musicians who could heal the sick or influence the weather through their playing. Most of the thread dismissed these stories as myths or exaggerations. But one user had posted something that made Sarah's heart race. They wrote about an old theory, more philosophy than science, that suggested music was a bridge between the physical world and something else. That certain individuals, in certain circumstances, could use music to access and channel forces beyond normal human experience. The user called it harmonic resonance with the fundamental frequencies of reality. It sounded crazy, like something from a science fiction novel. But it also felt true in a way Sarah couldn't explain. She kept reading, following links, diving deeper into obscure websites and archived articles. She found references to ancient cultures that used music in sacred rituals, believing it could open doors to spiritual realms. She discovered modern theories about sound frequencies and their effects on matter and energy. She read about studies showing how certain musical tones could influence water crystals, plant growth, even human cell structure. By the afternoon, Sarah's head was spinning with information. None of it gave her a clear answer, but it painted a picture. Music was powerful. Sound was powerful. And somehow, for reasons she didn't understand, she had tapped into that power. The question was, what was she supposed to do with it? Sarah stood up from her laptop and walked to the window. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet. Trees swayed in a gentle breeze, and somewhere a dog was barking. Everything looked so normal, so ordinary, but she felt like she was standing at the edge of something vast and unknown. She thought about Mrs. Kowalski's words. A natural gift. Maybe that's what this was. Not something to be afraid of, but something to be developed, something to be understood and used. Sarah made a decision. She would continue her lessons. She would keep practicing. But she would also experiment, carefully and privately. With this power, she would learn its limits, its possibilities. She would become someone who could control this gift, instead of being controlled by it. Because deep down, beneath the fear and confusion, there was something else growing. A sense of purpose. A feeling that this wasn't random or accidental. This had happened for a reason, and it was up to her to discover what that reason was. 2 weeks passed, and Sarah fell into a new rhythm. She practiced at the community center 3 times a week, always choosing times when the building was least crowded. During her official lessons with Mrs. Kowalski, she held back, keeping her playing competent but unremarkable. But during her private practice sessions, she let the power flow. She was learning things about it, small details that helped her understand what was happening. The warmth always started in her chest, right behind her breastbone, and it grew stronger the more emotionally connected she felt to the music. Fast, technical pieces produced less of the effect than slow, emotional ones. And the physical manifestations, the shimmering air and sparks of light, only appeared when she truly lost herself in the playing. Sarah started keeping a journal, documenting each session. She wrote down which pieces she played, how long she practiced, and what effects occurred. It felt scientific, giving her some sense of control over something that seemed fundamentally beyond logic. On a Thursday evening, 3 weeks after everything had started, Sarah was practicing a piece by Chopin. It was far too advanced for her skill level, but she had found a simplified version online and had been working on it obsessively. The melody was heartbreakingly beautiful, full of longing and sadness, and every time she played it, she felt the power surge stronger than ever before. She was halfway through the piece when something new happened. As her fingers moved across the keys, the sparkles of light that usually appeared began to coalesce. Instead of dancing randomly, they started to form shapes, swirls and patterns that moved in harmony with the music. Sarah watched in amazement as the lights created what looked almost like a moving painting in the air above the piano. She kept playing, afraid that stopping would break the spell. The shapes became more defined. They looked like flowing water, like wind moving through grass, like emotions given visible form. It was the most beautiful thing Sarah had ever seen. Then the door to the recreation room opened. Sarah's hands froze on the keys. The lights vanished instantly, winking out like stars at dawn. She spun around on the bench to see who had entered. It was a man she had never seen before. He looked to be in his 50s, with silver-streaked hair and sharp blue eyes. He wore jeans and a sweater, nothing remarkable. But there was something about the way he looked at her that made Sarah's skin prickle with awareness. "Please don't stop," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "What you were doing was quite extraordinary." Sarah's throat went dry. "I don't know what you're talking about." The man smiled slightly. "Yes, you do. I saw the lights, the patterns in the air. I've been watching you for the past week, Sarah." Fear shot through her. "You've been watching me? That's creepy. I should call security." "There's no security guard in this building on Thursday evenings," the man said, stepping further into the room. "And I mean you no harm. Quite the opposite, actually. My name is David Winters, and I'm here to help you understand what's happening to you." Sarah stood up, putting the piano bench between them. "How do you know my name? I heard your teacher use it." "Mrs. Kowalski." "Correct? She's a good instructor, though she has no idea what she's really teaching you. Look, I don't know who you are or what you want, but you need to leave." David held up his hands in a peaceful gesture. "I understand you're frightened. What you're experiencing is confusing and probably terrifying. But you're not alone, Sarah. There are others like you. Others who can channel power through music." The words hung in the air between them. Others like you. Sarah wanted to dismiss it, to grab her things and run. But a part of her, the part that had been desperate for answers, made her stay. "What do you mean, channel power?" she asked slowly. David moved to one of the chairs against the wall and sat down, deliberately making himself less threatening. "May I explain? It will take a few minutes, but I think you need to hear this." Sarah remained standing, ready to bolt if necessary. But she nodded. "Throughout history," David began, "there have been people who could access what we call the resonance. It's a fundamental energy that runs through everything in existence. Most people never perceive it, let alone interact with it. But some people, under certain circumstances, can tap into it. And one of the most effective channels for accessing the resonance is music." "That sounds like something from a fantasy novel," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I know how it sounds. But you've felt it, haven't you? The warmth in your chest. The sense of connecting to something vast and powerful. The physical manifestations, light and energy, responding to your playing." Sarah didn't answer, but her silence was confirmation enough. David continued, "The ability usually manifests in people who have a natural affinity for music, but who, for whatever reason, haven't pursued it until later in life. It's like a dam that's been building pressure for years, and when it finally opens, the power flows through with unusual intensity." "Why me?" Sarah whispered. "I'm nobody special. I'm just a regular person." "That's where you're wrong. Everyone who can touch the resonance is special, but not in the way you might think. It's not about being better or chosen. It's about being open, being ready. You picked up piano at exactly the right moment in your life, when you were ready to receive this gift." Sarah slowly sat back down on the piano bench, her legs suddenly weak. "What am I supposed to do with it?" "That's up to you. Some people use it to heal. Music can mend more than just emotions. It can actually help physical ailments. Some use it to create, making art that moves people in profound ways. Some use it to protect, creating barriers and defenses through sound. The resonance responds to intention as much as to the music itself. And you? Sarah asked. What do you use it for? David smiled. I'm a teacher now. I used to perform, many years ago. I was a violinist. Quite successful, actually. But I never understood what I could do, until it was almost too late. I let the power control me instead of learning to control it. That's why I look for others like you, to help them avoid my mistakes. How did you find me? People who can access the resonance create ripples. Think of it like dropping a stone in a pond. Those of us who are trained can sense those ripples. I felt yours a few weeks ago, and traced it here. I've been waiting for the right moment to approach you. Sarah's mind was reeling. Everything David was saying aligned with what she had experienced. But it was still almost too much to process. What happens if I don't want this? What if I just stop playing piano? David's expression grew serious. You could try. But the resonance, once awakened, doesn't simply go away. It would find other outlets. Music is just one channel. If you suppress it through one avenue, it might manifest through another, potentially in ways you can't control or understand. The safest path is to learn to work with it. So I don't really have a choice. You always have a choice. But some choices lead to better outcomes than others. Sarah looked down at the piano keys, thinking about everything that had happened. The fear and wonder. The sense of discovering a hidden part of herself. The power that both thrilled and terrified her. If I wanted to learn, she said carefully, if I wanted to understand this properly, what would that involve? David leaned forward, his eyes bright with interest. Training. Practice. Not just with the piano, but with the resonance itself. Learning to sense it, to shape it, to use it safely. I work with a small group of others like us. We meet twice a month to share knowledge and help each other develop our abilities. You would be welcome to join us. 1. A group? How many others are there? In this city? 5, including myself. Worldwide? We're not exactly sure. We're not organized in any formal way. But we do try to find each other. To help each other. Sarah stood up and paced the room, trying to organize her thoughts. This was huge. This changed everything. If what David was saying was true, then her entire understanding of reality needed to shift. But hadn't it already shifted? The moment those first sparkles of light had appeared, the moment she had felt that warmth flowing through her, hadn't her world already transformed? She turned back to David. I need time to think about this. Of course. I understand. This is overwhelming. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card, setting it on top of the piano. My contact information. When you're ready to talk more, call me. And Sarah, be careful with your practice until we talk again. The power grows stronger the more you use it. Make sure you're always in control. David stood and walked to the door. Before leaving, he looked back at her. What you have is a gift. Don't be afraid of it. But do respect it. The resonance is powerful. And power without understanding can be dangerous. Then he was gone, leaving Sarah alone in the recreation room with a business card and a head full of impossible revelations. She looked at the card. It was simple. Just a name and phone number. No title, no company. Just David Winters. In plain black text. Sarah picked up the card and slipped it into her pocket. Then she sat back down at the piano and placed her hands on the keys. She didn't play, just rested her fingers there, feeling the smooth surface of the ivory, the resonance. Others like her. A whole, hidden world she had never known existed. Sarah took a deep breath and played a single note. Middle C. The sound rang out clear and pure, and she felt that familiar warmth begin to build in her chest. She was standing at a crossroads. She could walk away, try to ignore this strange gift, and go back to her normal life. Or she could step forward into the unknown, into a world of music and power and possibilities she couldn't yet imagine. As the note faded into silence, Sarah already knew which path she would choose. Sarah didn't call David right away. For 3 days, his business card sat on her dresser, a small white rectangle that seemed to glow with possibility and danger in equal measure. She went to work, came home, made dinner with Marcus, and tried to pretend that everything was normal. But at night, lying in bed, she could think of nothing else. The resonance. The word echoed in her mind, like a melody she couldn't forget. She found herself reaching for it during the day, that warm sensation in her chest, testing to see if it was there even without the piano. And it was. Faint but present. Like a pilot light that never quite went out. On Saturday afternoon, while Marcus was at his poker game with friends, Sarah finally made the call. David answered on the second ring, his voice warm and unsurprised, as if he had been expecting her. "I want to learn," Sarah said without preamble. "I want to understand what this is." "I'm glad," David replied. "Are you free tomorrow afternoon? I can introduce you to the others." Sarah agreed to meet him at a small cafe downtown at 2 o'clock. She spent the rest of the day in a state of nervous anticipation. Tomorrow, she would meet other people like her. People who understood. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. Sunday morning, she told Marcus she was meeting an old college friend for coffee. Another lie. They were piling up, these small deceptions, and each one made her feel more distant from her husband. But what choice did she have? How could she explain something she barely understood herself? The cafe was quiet when Sarah arrived, just a few scattered customers reading newspapers or working on laptops. David was already there, sitting at a corner table with 3 other people. Sarah's heart hammered as she walked toward them. David stood and smiled. "Sarah? Welcome. Let me introduce you to everyone." The first person was a woman in her early 40s with kind brown eyes and curly black hair pulled back in a loose ponytail. "This is Michelle," David said. "She works with the Resonance through singing." "It's wonderful to meet you," Michelle said, her voice melodic even in regular speech. "Don't be nervous. We're all friends here." Next was a young man, barely out of his teens, with bright green eyes and nervous energy. "This is Lucas. He plays guitar." Lucas gave her a shy wave. "Hey. I know this is probably weird. It was weird for me too at first." The third person was an older woman, probably in her 70s, with steel gray hair and a regal bearing. "And this is Eleanor. She's a cellist and has been working with the Resonance longer than any of us." Eleanor studied Sarah with sharp, intelligent eyes. "You have strong potential. I can sense it even now. David was right to bring you to us." Sarah sat down, feeling overwhelmed. "I don't really understand what I'm doing here, or what any of this means." "That's what we're here for," David said gently. "To help you understand. To share what we know. Michelle, why don't you start? Tell Sarah about your experience." Michelle nodded and wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. "I discovered my ability 5 years ago. I was singing in a church choir, something I'd done since I was a child. But one day, during a particularly moving hymn, I felt something shift inside me. My voice changed, deepened, somehow, and I could see that people in the congregation were affected in ways that went beyond normal emotion. Some people were healed of pain they'd been carrying. Others had revelations, sudden understanding of things that had been troubling them. It frightened me at first," Michelle continued. "I stopped singing for months. But the power didn't go away. It built up inside me until I felt like I would burst. That's when I found David, and he helped me understand that running from it was the wrong approach." Lucas spoke up next. "For me, it was different. I'm adopted, and I always felt like something was missing. You know? Like there was a part of me I couldn't access. When I picked up guitar at 16, It was like finding a key to a locked room. The resonance poured out of me almost immediately. I didn't have years of buildup like Michelle or you. It was just there, waiting. The manifestation varies, Eleanor added, her voice crisp and authoritative. But the source is the same. We're all tapping into the same fundamental energy, just expressing it through different channels. Music is the most common channel, because sound is vibration, and vibration is the language of the resonance. Sarah absorbed this, her mind working to fit these pieces together. David mentioned that the resonance can be used for different things: healing, creating, protecting. How do you know what you're supposed to do with it? The resonance responds to intention, David explained. When Michelle sings with the intention to heal, that's what happens. When Lucas plays to express emotion, his music can move people profoundly. Eleanor can create what we call harmonic shields, protective barriers of sound that can deflect negative energy or even physical harm. And you? I was primarily a creator, he said. My violin performances could make people see things, visual hallucinations that corresponded to the music. Beautiful things, usually. Landscapes, and colors, and patterns that existed only in the moment. But I learned the hard way that power without control is dangerous. I once performed in a concert hall and accidentally overwhelmed the entire audience. People were crying, fainting, completely lost in the visions I was creating. That's when I realized I needed to stop performing and start teaching instead. So what happens now? Sarah asked. How do I figure out what my purpose is? Eleanor leaned forward. You experiment. You practice. You learn to sense the resonance when you're not playing, to understand its rhythms and flows, and most importantly, you learn control. The power is seductive, Sarah. It feels good to use it, and it's easy to get lost in that feeling. But you must always remain the master of it, not the other way around. Over the next 2 hours, they talked about techniques and experiences. Michelle described exercises for sensing the resonance in everyday life. Lucas showed Sarah breathing techniques that could help channel the energy more smoothly. Eleanor explained the importance of grounding, of staying connected to physical reality, even while accessing something beyond it. David gave her homework. Practice playing with specific intentions. Try to heal a wilting plant in her home. Try to create specific visual effects with the sparks of light. Try to sense the resonance in other forms of vibration, like running water or wind in the trees. As the meeting broke up, Eleanor pulled Sarah aside. Secrets like this create distance in relationships, and distance creates vulnerability. The resonance works best when we're emotionally balanced and connected to the people we love. Sarah felt a pang of guilt. I don't know how to tell him. He'll think I've lost my mind. Perhaps, Eleanor said. Or perhaps he'll surprise you. People are more open to the impossible than we give them credit for, especially when it comes from someone they love and trust. Sarah drove home in a daze, her mind full of everything she had learned. She had a community now. People who understood what she was going through. It should have felt reassuring, but instead it made everything feel more real, more serious. This wasn't just a strange quirk or a phase she would grow out of. Marcus was home when she arrived, watching a basketball game on TV. He looked up and smiled when she came in. Hey, how was your friend? Good, Sarah said, the lie tasting bitter in her mouth. That night, lying in bed, Sarah made a decision. She would tell Marcus. Not everything, not yet, but something. She couldn't keep living this double life. Over the next week, Sarah practiced with intention, as David had instructed. She played for the dying houseplant in their living room, a fern that had been struggling for months. As she played a gentle, nurturing melody, she focused all her attention on the plant, on the idea of health and growth and vitality. The warmth flowed through her and out through the music, and she could swear she saw the fern's leaves lift slightly, gaining color. She experimented with the light patterns, trying to shape them into specific forms. It was harder than she expected. The lights wanted to move in their own patterns, following the emotion of the music rather than her conscious control. But gradually, she learned to guide them, creating simple shapes, circles, spirals, waves, and she practiced sensing the resonance without music. Sitting quietly in her office during lunch breaks, she would close her eyes and feel for that warmth in her chest. She learned to detect it in other sounds too. The hum of the air conditioning had a faint resonance. The rhythm of typing keyboards in her office created tiny ripples. Even people's voices carried traces of it, though most people were completely unaware. The more she practiced, the stronger the power grew. And with it came a growing sense of purpose. This wasn't random. This wasn't meaningless. She had been given this ability for a reason, and it was up to her to discover what that reason was. On Friday night, 2 weeks after meeting the group, Sarah decided it was time. Marcus was in the kitchen making his famous pasta sauce, humming along to the radio. Sarah took a deep breath and walked in. "Marcus, can we talk?" "There's something I need to tell you." He turned down the heat on the stove and looked at her, concern crossing his face. "Sure, babe. What's up? You've been acting kind of strange lately." Sarah sat down at the kitchen table, gathering her courage. "You know how I started taking piano lessons?" "Yeah, at the community center. You said it was just for fun. It started that way. But something happened. Something I can't really explain, but I need you to know about it." Marcus pulled out a chair and sat across from her. "No, nothing like that. It's just..." Sarah struggled to find the words. "When I play piano, strange things happen. I can feel something, like energy flowing through me. And sometimes there are lights, and the air shimmers, and I think I might be able to affect things with the music." Marcus stared at her for a long moment. Then he said, "Like what? Magic? I don't know what to call it. But it's real, Marcus. I'm not making it up or imagining it. There are other people who can do it too. I've met them." Her husband's expression was hard to read. Confusion, certainly. Maybe concern. But not disbelief. "Not yet. Can you show me?" Sarah hadn't expected that. "You want to see?" "Yeah. I mean, if this is really happening, I want to understand." Sarah's heart swelled with love for him. He wasn't dismissing her or calling her crazy. He was asking for evidence, which was perfectly reasonable. "Okay. But we'd need to go somewhere with a piano. And there's one at my parents' house, the old one in their basement. We could drive over there now if you want." 20 minutes later, they were standing in the Chen's basement. The piano was old and out of tune, but it would work. Sarah sat down on the dusty bench and looked up at Marcus, who stood a few feet away, arms crossed, but expression open. "Just watch," she said, "and keep an open mind." Sarah placed her hands on the keys and began to play. The basement was dim and dusty, lit only by a single bulb hanging from the ceiling. Sarah's fingers trembled slightly as they found the keys. She chose something simple, a piece she knew well now. The simplified Chopin melody that always brought the power flowing through her most easily. As she played, Sarah let go of her fear and her need to control. She let the music wash through her, let the resonance rise from that warm place in her chest and flow down her arms and into her hands. The old piano, despite being out of tune, suddenly sang with a richness that filled the small basement. Marcus took a step closer, his eyes widening. Sarah could see the exact moment when the air began to shimmer. It started subtly, like heat waves on a summer road, then grew more pronounced. The sparkles of light appeared next, tiny points of brilliance that danced in rhythm with the melody. "Sarah," Marcus breathed, his voice full of wonder. "What is that?" Do. She didn't answer, couldn't answer, without breaking her concentration. Instead, she poured more emotion into the playing. The lights grew brighter, more numerous, and they began to form patterns in the air. swirls and spirals that seemed to tell a story. Her story. The loneliness of her ordinary life, the discovery of something extraordinary. The fear and the wonder, mixing together. The patterns shifted, showing the shape of her love for Marcus. It manifested as warm, golden threads that reached out toward where he stood. Sarah hadn't consciously intended this, but the resonance responded to the emotions beneath her thoughts, and her love for her husband was one of the strongest things she felt. Marcus reached out tentatively toward the lights, and when his fingers passed through them, he gasped. "I can feel it. It's warm. Sarah, this is incredible." Sarah brought the piece to its conclusion, the final notes hanging in the air as the lights slowly faded. The shimmer dissipated like morning mist, and the basement returned to its ordinary state. She turned on the bench to look at her husband. His face was a mixture of awe and confusion. He ran his hand through his hair, a gesture he always made when he was processing something big. "That was real. I saw it. I felt it. How long has this been happening?" "About 5 weeks now, since I started lessons. And you didn't tell me?" Sarah stood and walked to him. "I didn't know how. I was scared. I thought you'd think I was crazy, or that I was sick, or that I'd somehow changed into someone you didn't know anymore." Marcus took her hands in his. "Sarah, you could have told me anything. You should know that. We're partners." His voice was gentle, but held a note of hurt. "I know. I'm sorry. Eleanor, one of the others like me, she said I needed to tell you, that keeping secrets would create distance between us. She was right. Eleanor, others like you," Marcus repeated. "How many?" Sarah told him everything then. About David finding her at the community center. About the group meeting at the cafe. About the resonance and what it could do. About the practice and the growing power and the sense that this was leading somewhere, to some purpose she hadn't yet discovered. Marcus listened without interrupting, his construction worker's hands still holding hers, grounding her. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "This is a lot to take in," he finally said. "Like, universe-altering lot. But I believe you. I saw what you did just now, and that wasn't a trick or an illusion. That was real." Relief flooded through Sarah so intensely she felt tears prick her eyes. "You're not afraid of me? I mean, afraid?" Marcus pulled her into a hug. "Babe, you're my wife. You're the person who burns toast every Sunday morning and cries during dog food commercials. Having some kind of magical music power doesn't change who you are. It's just a new thing about you. Like when you suddenly decided you wanted to learn to knit last year." Sarah laughed despite herself. "This is a bit bigger than knitting." "Yeah, okay, fair point. But the principle is the same. You're still you." He pulled back to look at her face. "Though, I have questions. Like, a lot of questions. Can you make money with this? Can you hurt someone with it? What happens if you play too much? Is there, like, a superhero team you need to join?" Sarah laughed again, feeling lighter than she had in weeks. "Then we'll figure it out together," Marcus said firmly. They went upstairs to find Marcus's parents watching television in the living room. Sarah and Marcus thanked them for letting them use the basement piano, making some excuse about Sarah wanting to practice on a different instrument. As they drove home, Sarah felt like a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. That night, Marcus asked her to play for him again. They didn't have a piano at home, but Sarah pulled out her laptop and found a virtual keyboard app. It wasn't the same as a real piano. But when she played, the resonance still responded. Smaller, more contained, but present. "Can you control what the lights do?" Marcus asked, watching the small sparkles dance above the laptop keyboard. "I'm learning. David's been teaching me. It responds to intention, but also to emotion. Sometimes, what I feel is stronger than what I intend, and that takes over." "What do you feel right now?" Sarah thought about it as her fingers moved across the keys. Happy, relieved, loved, grateful that you understood. Sarah, the lights shifted, turning warmer in color, moving in gentle, peaceful patterns. Marcus reached out and let them flow over his hand. It feels like sunshine, he said softly. Like being warm from the inside out. Over the next few weeks, something shifted in Sarah's practice. Having Marcus's support changed everything. She felt more grounded, more confident. The power grew stronger. But so did her control over it. She practiced daily now. Sometimes at the community center, but also at Marcus's parents' house when they were out. Her father-in-law had even started having the piano tuned regularly, pleased that someone was finally using it. Her lessons with Mrs. Kowalski continued, and Sarah had to be more careful than ever to hide her true abilities. But she was getting better at that too, learning to play beautifully without letting the resonance show. It was like speaking in two different languages, and Sarah was becoming fluent in both. The group met again, and this time, Sarah brought Marcus along. David and the others welcomed him warmly. It wasn't uncommon for the partners of those with abilities to know the truth, they explained. In fact, it was healthier. Secrets, strained relationships, and those with resonance abilities needed strong, stable emotional foundations to work from. Eleanor took a particular interest in teaching Sarah. "You have remarkable potential," the older woman told her during a private session. "Your ability to shape the visual manifestations is unusually strong. Most of us can create light. But you're building structures, telling stories. That's rare. What should I do with it?" Sarah asked. It was the question that kept her up at night. The sense that this power had a purpose beyond just existing. "That's for you to discover," Eleanor said. "The resonance calls different people to different paths. Listen to what it's telling you. Pay attention to the moments when the power flows strongest, when the connection feels deepest. Those moments will show you your direction." Sarah thought about this constantly. She noticed that the resonance was strongest when she played pieces that expressed deep emotion. Joy, sorrow, love, longing, and the visual patterns that formed were most beautiful, most complex, when she was thinking about stories, about human experiences and connections. One evening, she was practicing at the community center when she had a realization. The patterns of light she created weren't random. They were narrative. They showed the emotional journey of the music, the story being told through sound. And when people saw them, as Marcus had in the basement, they felt that story too. They connected with it on a level deeper than words. Sarah stopped playing and sat very still. She understood now. Her purpose wasn't to heal like Michelle, or to protect like Eleanor, or to create visions like David once had. Her purpose was to tell stories. To take human experiences and emotions and translate them into something visible and tangible through the combination of music and light. To help people see and feel things they might otherwise miss. It was like being a painter and a composer at once, but the canvas was air and light, and the paint was pure emotion channeled through the resonance. Sarah pulled out her phone and called David. "I think I know what I'm meant to do," she said when he answered. "I think I know my path." "Tell me," David said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "I'm meant to be a storyteller. Not with words, but with music and light. I can show people their own emotions reflected back at them. I can help them understand their own experiences by making those experiences visible." "That's beautiful, Sarah. And powerful. How do you want to develop this?" "I don't know yet. But I need to practice more. I need to get better at controlling the patterns, at shaping them precisely. I need to learn how to tell specific stories, not just express general emotions." "Then that's what we'll work on," David said. "You're ready for advanced training. I'll set up some special sessions with Eleanor and me. We'll help you refine your gift." 2. After hanging up, Sarah sat at the piano for a long time. Not playing, just thinking. She had spent 32 years being ordinary, being normal, being just another person in a world of billions. But something had changed. She had changed, and while it was frightening and strange and sometimes overwhelming, it was also the most real thing she had ever experienced. Sarah placed her hands back on the keys and began to play. This time, she played her own story. The notes were simple, the melody borrowed from various pieces she had learned, stitched together in a new way. But as she played, the lights appeared and began to form shapes that showed her journey. A small figure sitting at a piano. Sparkles of light appearing for the first time. Fear and wonder mixing together. A husband holding his wife's hands. A group of people gathered around a table. And finally, a woman standing in front of a piano, surrounded by patterns of light that told stories of the human heart. The visual narrative played out above the piano. Beautiful and imperfect and entirely hers. When she finished, Sarah sat in silence, tears streaming down her face. Not sad tears, but tears of recognition, of finding something she hadn't known she was looking for. She was no longer just Sarah Chen, data analyst. She was Sarah Chen, storyteller of the resonance, and her real story was only just beginning. 3 months after her conversation with David about finding her path, Sarah stood in front of a small audience in a converted warehouse space. Her hands were sweating, and her heart hammered against her ribs. This was it, her first public performance. The space was intimate. Maybe 40 people seated in folding chairs arranged in a semicircle around a beautiful grand piano. David had helped her organize this event, reaching out to friends and family of the Resonance Group, people who knew about the abilities and wouldn't panic or run when things got strange. Eleanor sat in the front row, her silver hair gleaming under the soft lights. Michelle and Lucas were there too, along with Marcus, who gave her an encouraging thumbs up. But there were also people who had never witnessed the resonance before. Friends of friends who had been told this was a unique musical performance, something experimental and profound. Jenny was there, Sarah's best friend from college, curious and supportive, even though she didn't fully understand what she was about to see. Mrs. Kowalski sat near the back, invited because Sarah felt she deserved to know the truth about her student. Sarah had spent the past 3 months in intensive training. Eleanor had pushed her hard, teaching her to control the light patterns with precision. David had worked with her on narrative structure, on how to build emotional arcs within a musical performance. Michelle had shared techniques for maintaining stamina, for channeling the resonance for extended periods without exhaustion. And Sarah had practiced hours every day, pushing herself to master not just the piano, but the art of visual storytelling through light and sound. She had learned to create specific shapes, to time the patterns to musical phrases, to build anticipation and deliver emotional payoffs. She had discovered that the resonance responded to authenticity, that the most powerful effects came when she played from her own truth, rather than trying to manufacture emotions she didn't feel. Tonight's performance would tell a single story, but it would have 3 movements, 3 chapters in the journey of a person discovering they were more than they appeared to be. She had chosen to make it universal, rather than specifically about herself, so that anyone watching could see their own struggles and triumphs reflected in the narrative. Sarah sat down at the piano and took a deep breath. The room fell silent. She placed her hands on the keys and closed her eyes for just a moment, reaching for that warm place in her chest, where the resonance lived. It was there, steady and strong, waiting for her. The first movement began with a single note. Soft, tentative, questioning. The resonance flowed through her fingers, and the first sparkles of light appeared above the piano. They were dim at first, uncertain, mirroring the hesitant music. Sarah played a simple melody, childlike in its innocence, and the lights formed the shape of a small figure, just an outline, barely visible, representing someone who didn't yet know their own potential. The melody grew slightly more complex as the figure moved through a world made of shadowy light shapes. The music expressed the monotony of ordinary life, the sense of going through motions without real purpose. Sarah could feel the audience leaning in, drawn by the combination of sound and vision. The patterns were beautiful, but restrained, full of unnamed longing. Then came the first shift. A new melodic line entered, brighter and more energetic. The shadowy figure touched something in the light world, and suddenly color bloomed. The resonance surged through Sarah as she played with more passion, and the lights responded by becoming richer, more vibrant. The figure and the patterns began to glow from within. This was the moment of discovery. The musical narrative spoke of finding something unexpected, something that changed everything. Sarah played with her whole heart, remembering that first evening in the community center, that first time she had felt the power flowing through her. The lights danced and swirled, showing the figure's wonder and fear and exhilaration all at once. The first movement ended with the glowing figure standing alone, surrounded by possibilities represented by spiraling patterns of light that hadn't yet taken definite shape. Sarah transitioned into the second movement without pause. The music became darker here, more conflicted. This was the chapter about struggle and doubt. The glowing figure in the light patterns tried to hide its light, to push it back down. The music expressed fear of being different, fear of judgment, the weight of keeping secrets. Sarah thought about those weeks of lying to Marcus, of feeling isolated even in crowds. The patterns showed the figure becoming dimmer, the light trying to escape but being contained. The music grew more agitated, building tension as the figure fought against its own nature. This was the hardest part to perform, because Sarah had to channel genuinely difficult emotions. But she had learned from Eleanor that acknowledging pain was part of the path. The resonance didn't only respond to positive feelings. It responded to truth. The tension built until it became almost unbearable. The music reached a crisis point, and the light figure seemed on the verge of shattering. Then, in a moment Sarah had carefully choreographed, another figure appeared in the patterns. This one reached out to the first, offering acceptance rather than judgment. The music softened, becoming tender. This represented Marcus in the basement, saying, "You're still you." But it was also bigger than that. It was the moment anyone finds someone who sees them fully and loves them anyway. The two figures in the patterns came together, and their combined light grew stronger, more stable. Sarah played with tears streaming down her face, but she didn't stop. This was too important. The second movement ended with the two figures standing together, surrounded by light that no longer fought to be contained but flowed freely around them. The third and final movement began with a single clear note that rang out like a bell. The music became soaring and triumphant, no longer tentative or conflicted but confident and purposeful. The light patterns exploded in complexity and beauty, filling the air above the piano with intricate designs that shifted and evolved with each phrase of music. The glowing figure from the earlier movements was now fully bright, no longer trying to hide. And around it, Sarah created a world of light, landscapes and faces, and emotions made visible. The figure reached out, and where it touched, new lights appeared. This was the moment of sharing, of using the gift not for oneself, but for others. Sarah channeled everything she had learned into this final section. The patterns told stories within the larger story. She showed moments of joy and sorrow, connection and loss, fear and courage. She showed the full spectrum of human experience, all of it valid, all of it worthy of being seen and acknowledged. The music built to its climax, and Sarah let the resonance flow through her with complete trust. The patterns of light filled the entire space, surrounding the audience, immersing them in the story. She could hear gasps and soft crying, could sense without seeing that people were being moved on a profound level. Then, gently, Sarah brought the music back down. The patterns simplified, returning to the single glowing figure. But this time, the figure wasn't alone. Small lights surrounded it, representing all the connections made, all the people touched by its story. The music became quiet and peaceful, a lullaby of completion. Sarah played the final chord and let it ring out until the sound faded to nothing. The patterns of light hung in the air for a few seconds longer, then gradually dissolved like snow melting in sunshine. The room was completely silent. Sarah sat very still, her hands resting on the keys, afraid to look up. Had it worked? Had the story come through? Or had she just made a spectacle of herself? Then the applause started. It began with Marcus standing up, clapping hard, and quickly spread through the audience. People were on their feet, some crying openly, others smiling with wonder. Sarah looked out at them and saw her story reflected back in their faces. They had understood. They had felt it. Eleanor approached the piano first, her eyes bright with pride. "That was extraordinary, my dear. You've truly found your voice." Jenny pushed through the crowd next, grabbing Sarah in a fierce hug. "I don't understand what I just saw, but it was the most beautiful thing I've ever experienced. We need to talk. Like, seriously talk." Mrs. Kowalski was waiting when the initial rush subsided. The older woman's expression was thoughtful, perhaps a bit sad. "I thought there was something unusual about your playing. I've been teaching for 40 years, and I've never seen anything like what you just did." Sarah took her former teacher's hands. "You gave me the foundation. You taught me the language of music. Everything else built on what you showed me." People lingered, wanting to talk, to ask questions, to share how the performance had affected them. A woman in her 50s told Sarah she had seen her own journey of coming out to her family in the patterns. A young man said the music had helped him understand his grief over losing his father. A teenage girl thanked Sarah for showing her that being different could be powerful rather than shameful. Each person had seen something personal in the universal story Sarah had told. That was the magic of the resonance, David explained later. It created a bridge between the specific and the universal, allowing people to find their own meaning in the shared experience. As the crowd dispersed, Marcus came and put his arm around Sarah's shoulders. "I'm so proud of you," he said quietly. "You took this scary, confusing thing and turned it into something that helps people. That's who you are." Sarah leaned against him, exhausted but fulfilled. The performance had drained her in a way that regular piano playing never did. Channeling the resonance for that long, with that much precision, had taken everything she had. But it had been worth it. David organized the cleanup while Sarah rested, sitting on the piano bench and sipping water. Eleanor sat down beside her. "This is only the beginning, you know," the older woman said. "You could do this professionally. Small venues at first, then larger ones, as word spreads. There are people all over the world who hunger for what you can give them. A way to see their own stories, to feel less alone in their struggles." "I don't know if I'm ready for that," Sarah admitted. "You'll grow stronger with practice. The resonance grows with us, adapts to our needs, and you won't be doing it alone. We're all here to support you." Sarah looked around the warehouse space at her small community. David was laughing with Lucas about something. Michelle was helping stack chairs. Marcus was talking animatedly with one of the audience members who had stayed behind. These people had helped her transform from someone who was terrified of her own power into someone who could share it with others. "I want to do more performances," Sarah said, making the decision as she spoke. "Maybe once a month at first. Small audiences, intimate venues. I want to tell different stories, explore different aspects of the human experience." "That's perfect," Eleanor said. "Start small. Build your strength and your repertoire. The path will unfold as you walk it." Over the next few months, that's exactly what Sarah did. She performed monthly, each show exploring a different theme: love and loss, fear and courage, belonging and isolation, hope and despair. Each performance was unique. The patterns never exactly the same twice, because they responded to Sarah's own emotional state as much as to her intention. Word spread slowly but steadily. People who had attended brought friends. Sarah created a small email list for those who wanted to know about upcoming performances. She kept her day job at first, performing on weekends. But the work as a data analyst began to feel increasingly hollow compared to the work she did with the resonance. 6 months after her first performance, Sarah made another decision. She gave notice at her job. Marcus supported her completely, even though it meant living on a tighter budget. Sarah began to teach as well as perform, working with David to identify other people who might have latent resonance abilities. She helped them through those first confusing moments of discovery, just as David and the others had helped her. Jenny, after attending several more performances and long conversations over coffee, Jenny admitted, "But I want to try. I want to see if there's more to me than I think." Sarah started teaching Jenny piano with the specific intention of watching for signs of resonance. It didn't appear immediately, but Sarah knew now that these things took time. The power revealed itself when a person was ready, not before. A year after sitting down for that quiet practice that had changed everything, Sarah performed in a real theater for the first time. 200 seats, all sold out. The performance was reviewed by a local arts blogger who didn't know about the resonance, but described the show as unlike anything else in modern performance art, combining music and light installation in a way that speaks directly to the soul. The review brought more attention, and with it came questions Sarah had to carefully navigate. How did she create the light effects? What technology was she using? She and David worked out careful responses that were technically true but avoided the full truth. The world wasn't quite ready to know about the resonance. Not yet. Maybe someday. But for now, it remained a secret shared only with those who needed to know. Sarah stood backstage after that theater performance, listening to the audience's applause, and thought about how far she had come. From a woman who felt invisible in her own life to someone who helped others see themselves more clearly. From someone afraid of her own power to someone who wielded it with purpose and grace. Marcus found her in the backstage area and pulled her into a hug. "You were amazing out there. I never get tired of watching you do this." "I never get tired of doing it," Sarah replied. "This is who I'm supposed to be." And it was true. The resonance had given her more than just an ability. It had given her a purpose, a community, and a deeper understanding of herself and others. The power that had once terrified her had become the lens through which she viewed the world, and through which she helped others view themselves. Sarah thought back to that first evening in the community center, sitting nervously at an old upright piano, pressing those first simple keys. She had been looking for a hobby, for something to fill empty hours. Instead, she had found her calling. The journey had been strange and frightening and magical. It had challenged her understanding of reality and pushed her far beyond her comfort zone, but it had also been the most genuine, most real experience of her life. Sarah walked back out onto the stage for her curtain call, the applause washing over her like a wave of warmth. The lights of the theater were bright, but not as bright as the lights she could create. The patterns that told stories and touched hearts. She bowed to the audience, gratitude flooding through her. Then she turned and walked off the stage, ready for whatever came next. Because this was only the beginning. The resonance had shown her who she could be, and she was just starting to explore the full possibilities of that identity. The piano echoed with her hidden power. And now that power was hidden no longer. It was her truth, her gift, her story, and she would spend the rest of her life sharing it with anyone ready to listen, ready to see, ready to feel. This was Sarah's story. The story of a quiet woman who discovered she could sing with light, who learned that being extraordinary was terrifying and wonderful in equal measure, who found that her greatest power came not from hiding who she was, but from revealing it fully to the world. And like all the best stories, it was true.